they're trying to pay for two properties or however that's balanced out in the way the divorce works, and then they end up being quite lonely. And one of my goals is to get guys to level up, because regardless if you don't stay in the relationship, if you step your game up whilst in the relationship, either it fixes the relationship or it doesn't. And if it don't, the chances are you're going to have options because of the work that you did, you know?
Hmm. I mean, I've had a friend who, it didn't matter what relationship, didn't matter how long he'd been single for, he would go out, meet the girl, and suddenly he would abandon all, you could never get him to come out for a pint. You could never get him to come and do something social. He lived the relationship. And then when he would break up, he would suddenly be texting, expecting you to drop everything and come out. It was almost like he didn't, it was like became like, like it was a symbiotic kind of organism. He lived through the relationship. That his identity became the relationship, and that's what I think was terrifying. Was he lost who he was because he only seemed to feel fulfilled by being in that relationship. And I think this is where this whole thing about toxic masculinity, but then Andrew Tate has become so successful and things like that, because people are so lost that they allow a relationship become their life. But how do we even start distinguishing between what we should have? Because we're shaped by our parents, by our upbringing, schooling, cultural beliefs.
Yeah.
How on earth do we even define what masculinity is to us? Because to be a man, it's great to say, yeah, it's this, this, and this. But there's so many different levels of masculinity, of what people want and things. And, if it's a sort of flowing river as your priorities change through life in the different seasons of life, how do we even define what masculinity is and what makes a good man for you compared to what might be for me compared to Johnny down the street?
Yeah. Well, this is interesting, right? Because when we look at it, you got to look at masculinity and femininity as social constructs, right? So they vary across the cultures, time periods, whereas male and female refer to biological sexes of human beings, right? So you can be a man that isn't necessarily masculine, and that's all right, right? Okay. But you are still taking care of your own bullshit and you are a provider, right? So we've gone back to, I remember you asked me about becoming a man, like you don't become a man when you're 18, right? And I remember you mentioning this, and it's true. You don't become a man when you're 18. That's an age, right? You go from a boy to a man when you take full accountability for yourself, right? So you have the ability and the intention, right? So you might not, you had the ability and or the intention, because some people don't always have the ability cash wise to do, taking care of things, but the intent's there. Most men want that. Yeah. You also have an ethical code to do the right thing, even when it's hard. And you also got to look at your decision making and say, does this decision serve me or the greater good? And that doesn't mean self-sacrifice, but it's about trying to make the right decision. So going back to what you're saying is, so as masculinity is a social construct, I'll give you my version, right? So emotional intelligence and self-awareness, right? So this is where emotional literacy comes in. Now you're talking masculine and you go, what are you talking about? Emotions, da, da, da. Anger is an emotion. A lot of good men in prison when they lost their shit. You get on top of your emotions, understand how to control and convey them through emotional literacy, right? And emotional intelligence, you won't be in prison. Do you understand where I'm coming from? So there's always that mix up of, I'm not saying to guys roll around the floor crying like a little baby.